Welcome back to another episode of the CSK8 podcast. My name is Jared O'Leary. This episode, I'm going to interview Katie Henry. In our discussion, we're going to talk about the microbit and the Do Your Bit challenge. And the microbit is a really awesome physical device that you can use in the class. It's very low cost, highly recommend it. In addition, we're going to talk about Rhizomatic Learning, which might be something you're not familiar with. Not too many people are, but it's a really cool approach to learning concepts and practices. And we're also going to talk about topics like the potential for computer science to be healing. So it's a wide-ranging discussion, but it's a wonderful conversation with Katie, and I really hope you enjoy it. Just a friendly reminder that there are a lot of show notes that connect to many of the topics that we discuss, including all the links to the Microbit resources that is created by Microbit and even by myself at BootUp. And just a little weird side note, while recording this episode, my landscapers decided to show up like right before recording. So I went back and re-recorded my questions at some portions when you would have just heard me asking a question over the top of a lawnmower. So fortunately, Katie's audio was great, and I just had to re-record mine. So if the audio sounds funny, that's why. But we will begin this podcast now with Katie introducing herself.
My name is Katie Henry, and I am the head of partner engagement for the Microbit Educational Foundation in North America.
Can you tell me the story of how you got into computer science education?
I never thought I would be in computer science education. I started my career as a second grade classroom teacher and completely loved it. I thought I would be teaching second grade until I retired. It turns out that life has a funny way of surprising you with the most unexpected possibilities. After teaching second grade, I moved into a fourth grade teaching position and fell in love with all of those students. I came into computer science education really by attending an hour of code activity at a neighboring school district. And I had never seen 100 students, 100 fourth graders all coding together in a library. And once I saw that, I wanted to come back to my school and do something similar.
So can you tell me about an experience in education that continues to impact you today?
You know, it's funny, but I remember my first week of teaching elementary school in second grade. There was a student who the other teachers had warned me about. And by warn, I mean, the phrase specifically was, if so-and-so gets out of hand, just turn his desk around and sit on him. And part of that was literal and part of that was a metaphor, but I wasn't sure which was which. And it had me really nervous about meeting the 7-year-old. And yet, when I met him that first week of school, I just found an incredibly sweet, open child that was desperately trying to connect with his peers and had no social skills for doing so. And so I wasn't surprised when somebody came to me one day and said, Miss Henry, this person just slapped me. And I immediately thought there must be a misconception because this child, I hadn't observed any outright aggression. And so I called him over. The girl was standing next to me and I said, can you share what happened? And both kids had been crying. That was obvious right away. So I felt like something else was going on. And the girl explained, the boy reached his hand out and he tried to steal my string. And the boy said, I was waving out the window at my friend walking by. From the tears on his face and the shape of his body and the tone in his voice, he was really, really, really sad that he had hit her. But I still didn't understand how a wave turned into a hit. And so that's when I realized that when one student thought the other was trying to take their string, that student became aggressive and the other student, to protect himself, slapped the other student. And so it was a miscommunication that turned into a smack, that turned into what could have been the narrative that here is this child acting out again. And so I use that even when I work with adults in trying to understand what's going on beneath the surface, because oftentimes what you think to be true really gets in the way of the truth. And you really have to take a step back and take in all the information, some of it nonverbal, and really be patient and try to understand what's really going on. That experience in that first week of teaching has really stayed with me and challenged my own biases, I will say.
Yeah, I like that story. It highlights that we need to look beyond just the initial actions that kids have or the things that they say or do. There's a professor that I have mentioned in previous podcasts, James Paul G. He has several books on discourse analysis, and in a couple of them, he mentions that we need to look at discourse like text or speech or media or whatever, and think through what people are saying, doing, and being So the saying part is the obvious thing, like, okay, this person said this sentence to me. The doing part is what kind of action are they trying to take with this speech? And then the being part is what kind of identities are they bringing to the table through this speech? So I like this story because rather than just responding to the initial act, you were trying to bring in multiple perspectives and consider different factors that could have contributed to the actual act.
I think in their own way, many people try to figure out the why of the other person. And this is where we can all get into deep water real fast, is we think we figured out why, and we haven't. And yet it's really important to ask that question. You just made me think of something. This is where negative bias and stereotype ramp up like in no other ways. It's in that nonverbal ways of being, trying to understand space, that liminal space where my cultural interpretation comes to the table to figure out what you mean and is trying to like check itself at the door, but still gets confused and maybe comes to the wrong conclusion. And I mean, not to like jump the gun here, but honestly makes me think about bias and algorithms. It's interesting how a little bit of the maker gets into that which is made, and we bring our biases into the algorithms that we write. That's a hard thing to explain to people.
Yeah, I agree. And what's nice is more people are talking about it. So this is starting to become more a part of public discourse. And people are starting to understand that there are biases, whether they're intentional or unintentional, in the different software and hardware that we use.
Absolutely. I think that it's so important for kids, especially to understand that when they work with a machine and learning how to respect the wonderful information that they bring to the table and learning how to engage with it, also learning how to understand that that machine was a made thing. Machines and people each bring something to the table and both bring biases.
I totally agree. I think that's a very important discussion to have. What's something that you believe when you first began working in education that you no longer believe?
It's subtle, but the way I used to survive my first year teaching when I was inundated with too much information, I would say, I don't know what to do right now, but I know what not to do, and I won't do that. But then as I got older, that changed for me a little bit because that still kept me actually in a little bit too much control. Because when I'm trying to make that decision, too much of my bias gets in. And usually you can't see your own implicit bias. So you end up making things worse. And I think I'm more comfortable with seeing what emerges when I don't choose because something will happen. And if I don't get in the way of that, it can often exceed my wildest imaginations and certainly maybe help more people because I didn't get in the way.
How did your experiences in CS education lead to your current position at Microbit?
In between teaching middle school STEAM and working at the Microbit Foundation, I worked at Birdbrain Technologies, which is a creative robotics company based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And on a trip with Birdbrain Technologies to London for the BET Show, which is an amazing educational technology conference, I learned about the Microbit back in 2017. So literally my experiences in CS education took me to the stage where Microbit was being presented, and I got to hear all about it. And I remember when I saw this little device the size of a credit card held up on stage, described as a computer that any child could use to learn computer science, and I saw what it could do, I thought, this could change everything. And so really since 2017 to today, I've been a huge advocate for the mission of the foundation, which is to inspire every child to create their best digital future. And you think about digital futures, that's not everyone become a computer science educator or a computer scientist, excuse me. But digital futures means we're aware that we're in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution, which increasingly relies on computer science and software to power our world in ways like we've never experienced. And to be ready to work in finance or healthcare or get creative in art and music or blending those worlds. Increasingly NASA scientists hire origami artists all the time to help think about folding satellites differently, and about microelectronics and surgical tools that will slide under the skin and open in such a way as to cause minimal invasive surgery so that people heal faster. So, we need folks that know how to fold paper in intricate ways to help our surgeries go smoother, to help our satellite communications be more reliable. And so inspiring every child to create their best digital future means we need to be ready to interact and create with these digital tools. The same mindset that said yes to the Hour of Code event at the neighboring school district, that said yes to a job at Bird Brain Technologies, that said yes to the microbit when I saw it on stage in London. It's been this journey of openness and willingness to try. I think that more than anything, it's not been formal education and a special degree and a lot of money and a lot of time. Definitely not those last two things.
So how would you describe what a microbit is for somebody who hasn't seen one before?
The microbit is a tiny credit card sized computer that any child can use to create technology. You can create wearable technology, musical instruments, games. You can create adaptive tools to help people learn better, move through life better, laugh more, smile more. On the technical side, the microbit has a thermostat, a motion detector, A/B buttons, a light sensor, has a compass. On the front of the microbit are a 5x5 array of LED lights. And so in the palm of your hand, literally, you have the power of a computer that can be used to create almost anything that your imagination can come up with. And I think when kids look at this, they don't ask themselves, what should that be? They say, what can I make with that? And I think that's a really powerful mindset for kids to be in, to look at a tool and say, what can I make? And I think a lot of other tools, you look at it and you say, what should I do? What's the right way? How do I do this? And you immediately, your heart and mindset, there's a power flip. And instead of being in the mindset of what can I make with that, you start saying, what are the rules? Let me clarify that, because rules and boundaries are part of the creative process. That's part of computational thinking, is grappling with the restrictions of any tool, what digital or non-digital. But I think for me that the differentiator is consumers give tools back to their creators and say, fix it when something goes wrong. Creators look at a thing that's broken and say, how can I fix it? They have the agency to say, I believe I have something to contribute to solving this problem. Creators work with other creators to solve unpredictable surprises. And so often in classrooms, unpredictable surprises get passed off to the adult or the older person in the room. Maybe it's not an adult, it could be a teenage volunteer or something like that. But sometimes age and experience get mixed up, and we don't realize that truly anybody can help solve a problem. And learning that from a young age, that your voice matters, your creativity matters, you can get involved in solving a problem now. That's what creators do. I think tools like the microbit help children to develop that agency.
And how do kids program that tool? So like what options does the microbit have in terms of creating all of those things you mentioned?
There are a lot. So if you wanted to get started today, you could go to MakeCode, which is Microsoft's block-based programming language. You toggle between blocks of JavaScript. You can go to Python. You can use Scratch. You can use just a whole host of open source editors that are out there, including EduBlocks, which is an amazing blocks to Python programming language from this amazing kid in the UK, Josh Lowe, who's also one of the co-editors of Micromag magazine. You can use BirdBlocks, which is a software program developed by Bird Brain Technologies. There are just tons and tons of languages out there. Firea Labs has a Python editor that'll work. You have Tinker, which is a coding platform for kids. They have their own block-based programming language they've developed for microbit. There are over 200 physical hardware accessories made by countless manufacturers all over the world. And a lot of these guys have created some type of software environment for programming your microbit. Really, if you want to program it, you're limited only by your imagination and what language you're going to choose. And if you wanted to go develop your own language for it, you could do that too.
And those hardware accessories augment the microbit.
Correct. So these are everything from climate action kits from Inksmith in Canada to bright bags from an amazing woman in California who's developing these great little bags for kids to code their wearable technology. We have little race cars, so many rovers, including Sphero, which has the option to integrate a microbit within their platform, their new rover platform. And that's RVR, but it's pronounced rover.
And I will include all of these in the show notes, and I'll even include in some of the microbit tutorials that I use that show you how to connect the microbit to Scratch and use them for like project extensions and whatnot. Using all those resources and platforms, extensions, and whatnot, how do you envision kids using a microbit to build upon their curiosities or to create their own digital futures?
How I see kids creating with microbits in their everyday experience is really just letting them know that these tools exist for them to create with. I think we have a lot of rules around the tools in the school so that kids know how to be safe, which is important, and that kids learn how to be resourceful. Unlimited access is never the solution. And so, what would it be like if kids knew that they could pick up microbits to solve problems at school? What if their creativity in solving problems didn't just include poster board and markers to make signs and tell people what to do, or clipboards and pencils to take surveys at recess? What if kids could be building their digital future at school today using something like a microbit? I think they can. And I think giving them that space and the respect to say, here's a tool that you can use the way you think it needs to be used, I think that would be really powerful to see what would happen. You mentioned acting on curiosities at one point, helping kids act on their curiosities. When you get curious about something on Netflix, you don't just stop and say, what should I watch on Netflix? Usually a friend kind of mentions a show that they've seen on Netflix, and the next chance you get, you scroll, you find it, and you watch it. I think that type of ethos in creating our digital futures and helping kids to act on their curiosities, it should be the same way with technology. That one child at recess can say, hey, I made this pedometer, or I made this bracelet, or I made this flashing hair tie, or I made this game for my friends on the bus. And another child can say, that's really cool, I want to make that too, and can go into class and actually create that digital tool using a microbit. I think demystifying technology includes sort of a everyday access mentality. And to be honest with you, that's what happened to me. I've always loved technology my whole life. I'm one of these middle school girls that somehow learned that technology is what you do when you're done with the real work. It was like there were computers in the classrooms, and the kids could only use computers when math packs were done. And, this was in the 90s. Which actually is a long time ago now. And so I never even thought of technology as something I could pursue as an undergraduate degree. I never really understood that people could create with technology for a living. And to be honest with you, most people in the future will be making a living by creating with technology in some way. And you don't have to, I'm not talking we're all going to be computer scientists. I'm saying the woman that comes and draws your blood from you when you go to the hospital. What's that called? The phlebotomist?
Yeah, Dr. Acula.
Yes. When that sample gets put into a cooler, we're not just turning the cooler on and off. We're programming that cooler for a certain amount of time and certain conditions. If they're true, we're going to take care of the blood in this way. And so I'm sorry if that grossed some people out with that example, but increasingly our on-off consumeristic world is in itself to be a consumer in the future is going to require baseline computer science knowledge. To be a creator in the future is definitely going to require some computer science literacy. And so we want kids to be creators because we want to, honestly, and here's what I believe, we want to disrupt who has first and best access to these tools. And what I mean by that is if the same folks who are always having access to create with technology are at the table creating with technology, just like we said in the beginning, a little bit of the maker gets into that which is made, and we will perpetuate and scale these negative biases and stereotypes like never before. I do not think that the future depends on getting more computer science majors and more computer science literacy. I think it involves diversifying who has access to these tools. So many solutions to our complicated problems are alive and beating in hearts of the people around us who don't have access to the tools to express their ideas.
And to express their ideas not just for corporate gain, but for the sake of creating or expressing oneself, or even just for a challenge.
Exactly.
Which kind of segues into the next topic. What is the Do Your Bit Challenge?
The Microbit Do Your Bit Challenge is a global challenge for any 8 to 14-year-old to create a solution to the global goals 14 and 15 using their microbit. The global goals are 17 goals set out by the UN in 2015. They range everything from gender equality to climate change to life underwater, life on land. 17 holistic goals that are set out to be solved by 2030. And so the Microbit Do Your Bit Challenge focuses on goals 14 and 15 as a way to rally the world's young people to create solutions using their microbit.
And can you read off goals 14 and 15 so everyone has some context of what the challenge is?
Goal 14, life below water. Conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. Goal 15, life on land. Protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss.
And why did Microbit choose those as goals to address in a challenge?
Well, this is actually the second global challenge from the Microbit Foundation, and it is a challenge that we hope to continue throughout each year. And so for this round of the challenge, we're focusing on 14 or 15. Those entering don't have to submit their solution around 14 or 15. It's just the one that we've chosen to focus on for this round. You don't need a microbit to enter. You can submit a paper prototype, and you can even use the free microbit simulator at makecode.org to create your program and submit your program. So the challenge closes on February 27th, 2020. And by the end of March, we will notify 12 winners, 6 first place winners and 6 runner-up winners. And the goal is for those 6 winners to represent different geographic areas around the world.
So we've talked about the things that you can do with a microbit, whether it be for the Do Your Bit Challenge or how you'd like to eventually see kids on the playground, like being like, look, I created a pedometer, look, I created a temperature sensor, etc. What are some pedagogical approaches that might kind of foster this kind of creativity or working towards solutions like in the challenge?
I think it matters that the educator in the room who's facilitating this experience sits next to and with the child who's creating. When we ask our students to open their hearts and their minds and to be vulnerable and take a risk and create something new, they need a lot of space from the adults in the room to let all of their ideas come onto the table. They can begin to play with them. And so when we ask our students to create solutions to wicked problems, like the ones described in the UN Global Goals, we need to give them time to work together in ways that they may never have worked together before. And so 2 things. These classrooms are safe classrooms. They're physically safe. We're not just being wild with hacksaws and glue guns and 3D printers. We're not getting burned and breaking things. We don't move fast and break things to create innovative solutions. That's how we get hurt, and that's how we hurt others. What we do to take care of each other is we listen and we respect. And, we have some rules of safety, right? But we also have some rules of psychological safety. And that means children have to learn that their ideas matter. And if a teacher is standing in the room with a rubric in their hand before the creativity has already started, I guarantee you they are only going to bring to the table what fits into those little boxes. I very gently challenge you to think about what your students think about that rubric. Because at the end of the day, whether you give them a 1, 2, 3, or 4, or you write a Q or a Z onto their paper, they won't care what you think about their work if they don't care about it first. And so making space for children to care and get involved first before the rubric comes out, and maybe it doesn't come out at all, I think is how we get the innovative solutions that we need to solve problems that we all care about. And so the pedagogical approach might mean taking a little step back and letting your students take a little step forward.
Yeah, that answer sounds a lot like what Sandy mentioned a couple weeks ago, and then what Bob mentioned more recently as well, in terms of like walking alongside kids rather than trying to tell them where to go or guide them without their their understanding. I really liked your point about thinking through the kids' perspectives. That's something that I tried to do in the classroom as well. And then is something that I do now, developing the free curriculum for Boot Up, is not thinking of like what standard do I need to start with and going from there, but instead thinking through what do kids want to learn or create, and then creating that thing and then go, okay, what do kids need to understand to be able to make that, and how does that then connect with the standards? So it's flipping it. So it's starting with thinking of the kids in mind. It's something that I highly recommend doing, whether it be for designing a lesson or a curriculum or whatever it is that you're creating.
You just reminded me of something I used to do in fourth grade. A really easy way to solve that problem is to look at your standard and whatever those keywords are, ask this question to the kids. When is blank a problem in your life? And it can be multiplication, weathering and erosion. It can be anything. In my head just now, I was picturing this pizza problem. We would always ask the kids, like, Susie had half a pizza. Somebody else had another half. Who had more pizza? And like, well, they both had half. Half is half. And then if this is a common math problem, then you show the children, one half of, a small pizza versus one half of a large pizza. And they're like, oh my gosh. And so question, when are fractions a problem in your life? And you get kids telling stories like, I traded half a bottle of glitter to my sister so that she would wash half the dishes for me on Tuesday. You're like, is that fair? Not fair. A lot of people don't realize that slope intercept can be a problem in their life, but like all your gamers out there, they want those game makers to really understand algebra. I mean, obviously that's how all these amazing games are being made. It's a lot of creative math. And when kids begin to see the application between essentially the standards you're held accountable for teaching and the application in their everyday life, they care. So I agree with you. Inviting kids into that problem solving process is important.
And I like the idea of contextualizing or situating it within a question, inquiry, or like some kind of a problem. I think that's a neat way of framing things. So we've initially met at a poster session at CSTA's conference, which I highly recommend for people going to every summer, usually on my birthday. So in that poster, one of the images that I have was like the sequential learning, like going from 1, 2, 3, like going through the steps. But then like rhizomatic learning, like if you picture a spider web or a network with a bunch of different nodes on it, rather than going through something in a sequence, kids could pick any one of those nodes and start there, whether it be like a computer science concept or a practice or a standard, whatever. And then they can go to any other node that's connected to it in some way. So this could be through inquiry, it could be through problems. There's many different approaches that you can take for it, but the point is that if you have 30 kids in a class, they could all start at 30 different nodes and go in 30 different directions after they complete that. So what does that actually look like to you in a classroom setting? Because it's easy to like think through the potential of this, but how would you describe what a classroom would look like if somebody walked into a space that was engaging in rhizomatic learning?
I think you're going to walk into a highly collegial space, but a highly unpredictable space. And unpredictability and safety can go together. Unpredictability doesn't mean things are exploding all the time and catching on fire and we're being unsafe.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. I mean, explosions are fun. I like a good explosion as much as the next person does. What I want to say is that, like, if an administrator walks into a classroom where a teacher is facilitating a rhizomatic learning experience, right? So just a rhizomatic classroom, it's teaching and learning. When you walk into this classroom, you're going to notice a lot of student self-selection happening. You'll see students forming groups, interest-based groups. You'll see students teaching students. You might notice a little more student handwriting on the walls, on the papers and the signs and the whiteboard than you will the adults. You'll see some of the adults. There's some contributions there, like what they talk about in leadership, like a level 5 leader. When you sit at a table of, like in a business or even in a school, and you're sitting at a table with administrators, it's like that quote, when the leader's work is done, the people will say we did it ourselves. When you sit at the table with administrators or even walk into a kid's classroom with kids, you're not going to be able to tell who the one main person is in control. And yet there will be a collegiality, there will be a lot of respect, and there will be a lot of unpredictability because you're creating together.
Yeah, and you know from our conversations that I totally agree with you. But like having had some experience with administrators who question it, what would you say to try and get them to better understand the value of this approach? Because it's very different than what like I went through in my K-12 tenure.
I'll tell you, that's a hard question. I think it's really hard to tell somebody the benefits of the approach, but I can do that and I will. But I think it's more of a lived experience. When you begin to realize that life's most powerful moments in your own life come from a little bit of unpredictability, a little bit of spontaneity, and a little bit of hope, only then will you want to let go of total and complete control of every aspect of your life. And that's a really deep thing. And I don't feel comfortable actually saying that. And I kind of want to like retract some of what I just said because we all come from such different experiences. And I'm definitely telling you my own experience. As a child growing up in school, I felt so trapped. I always felt like I have, and so many kids feel that way. I know I'm not alone. Our students come to us with a whole imagination of possibility in their head of what school will be that day. And some kids like me just relentlessly go in the doors each day, hoping for something more than it will be. And somehow we maintain a positivity. But a lot of kids, after a while, are like, this is stupid. I'm done with this. This person in here doesn't care about me. This content in this book doesn't matter to me. I hate this. And then my behaviors begin to change because suddenly I'm totally trapped in a place that's not good for me. And I begin to act in ways that reveal that this place isn't good for me. And at that point, that's really unfortunate that we have kids feeling trapped at school. And so, if you've never felt trapped before, if your life's going perfectly all the time, if you feel that total control is working for you, there's nothing I can say that's going to help you to understand rhizomatic learning. But if you're open to the possibility that something more might be out there that you can't control, I would say try it and see what happens.
Yeah, one of the things that I have talked to other people about is I felt like my schooling experience got better the further I got into it. In terms of I had more control and was able to explore the things that I was interested in. So when I started in my K-12, it was all handed to me. Here's what you're going to do. You don't really have too much of a say in things. You're just kind of creating within very defined constraints. During the undergrad, it lifted a little bit because you could choose some classes outside of your major, kind of like what you could with electives in high school. And in grad school, it was more of like, okay, well, here are the research things that you're going to look into, but you can kind of like specialize within that. So like I looked into like performance psychology while taking a music psychology class, and because that was something I was interested in. But then it wasn't until the doctorate where it was really like, well, what exactly do you want to become an expert at? And how are you going to cultivate that expertise? And how can we help you along the way? And then getting that mentorship. And most people don't get that far. And it costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of time. And what I don't understand is why, in just my experience, did I not feel like I really had ownership of my own potential learning inside of a formalized context until the doctorate? Why couldn't that have happened during my master's or my bachelor's, or preferably even as early as kindergarten? In the last interview, I spoke with Bob, and Bob was talking about how in his mind, it would be okay if we got rid of all standards and whatnot, or just didn't have to worry about them as much as we do. And I wonder how much of having standards kind of forces us into, well, here's what I have to teach and here's what I have to do. So in order to get to that and cover everything, I can't afford the time to do all these other things that kids might want to do.
And right there is where I would say rhizomatic learning will help, because if a teacher is saying, how am I going to cover it all? Mm-hmm. Right there, they back themselves into a corner.
Yep.
How will I help my students connect it all? And then you begin to see not just these disparate standards holding me back, you begin to uncover part of the rhizomatic root structure that connects everything. Those standards that you are held accountable to are very important. They do matter. They're not in your way unless you let them be in your way. How you interpret them, how you help your students make connections, how you work with your students to problematize the content in those standards, this is the beauty and joy of teaching. And then you begin to realize those standards are like stepping stones in the creek. You are picking your pathway across those stones, working with your students, and you are exploring a forest that's far more greater than those individual standards. They can be guiding, but they don't have to hold you back.
Right. And I will say, to try and voice some opinions of people who might be listening and going, yeah, but, and thinking those kind of things. It sounds difficult to do, but it's not as hard as it might sound. You just kind of need to think through what it could look like, or even look at what it might be. So I didn't really learn about rhizomatic learning until my master's from a professor, Evan Tobias, and he's been hugely influential by being able to model what that looks like and then kind of unpacking what the implications are for this kind of a process. So what I'll actually include in the show notes is a lot of resources related to rhizomatic learning. Some of them are presentations, some of them are publications, and some of them are just like videos of this one person in particular who's kind of talking about it. I'll even include in the links some videos of what my class looked like. So like the 40-minute videos, if you were to watch it, you kind of see that I'm just constantly walking around the room, asking questions and guiding kids to understand whatever it is they're working on. And if there's 30 kids in the room, they're all working on like 30 different projects and whatnot. So hopefully those resources will kind of help contextualize, oh, this is what it could look like. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to like dive into rhizomatic learning right away and go full force with it. You could just start by dabbling with it. Like, okay, here's 3 project options that we're all going to work on. You pick one of those 3, and then we'll go from there. And then maybe the next time it might be, here are 5. Or then after that, it might be, okay, here are 5, but you can also choose the opportunity to create your own kind of a project on top of that. And then eventually you might get to the point where it's like fully rhizomatic, where it's like, hey, create whatever you want. If you need some ideas, I can help guide you through that process. But otherwise, you know what to do, go. But it doesn't necessarily have to start there. It can start with taking these baby steps towards how to implement rhizomatic learning in a classroom.
And if you are too afraid to start with core content and curriculum in providing those options, another way to begin is to just think about what you say no to in the classroom and say yes to a student where you might have said no otherwise.
So if you use this kind of rhizomatic approach in the classroom or with the Do Your Bit challenge, you might end up with 30 different projects for 30 different kids, which is great. So what do you hope to see come out of either this kind of learning or the Do Your Bit challenge itself?
What you're making me think of is helping kids develop their own agency, exercise their own agency. Life in a democracy depends on its citizens exercising their own agency to ask hard questions, to interrogate ideas. And if we value our democracy, which I hope we do, we care about people thinking for themselves. And 30 people with 30 ideas is really healthy in a democracy. 30 people with the leader's idea is not that healthy in a democracy.
What do you wish there was more research on that could inform your own practices?
I think there's a real growing movement, not only in the United States, but around the world. I've seen even in Australia, groups around trauma-informed school development in thinking about the trauma that our children come to school with each day. Homelessness as a form of trauma, poverty as a form of trauma, hunger as a form of trauma, certainly the violence that we see on the news as a form of trauma to us all. And so when we think about trauma-informed school development, we think about kids who come to school unable to learn because of the trauma that they are faced with in their day-to-day lives. And what I'm interested in learning more about is how we help these kids begin to learn again. I'm not saying nobody's capable of learning and somebody's stopped learning, but for anybody who's truly been traumatized by a life event, you need some time to heal. And if you've got to be at school the next morning with your peers and you've got an educator expecting you to memorize a definition or a fact or take a test, that actually compounds the trauma. I don't know what they could look like, but I picture these like creative computer science hubs, these places of creativity. And right now they exist already. They have these healing circles at schools, social justice circles, and they have different names that involve kids create color. They tell stories, meditation. There's art and motion. They're very safe spaces. They're not a lot of cognitive load. I want to know what might be possible with some creative digital technologies in those spaces, not for consuming, not to play with robots to feel better. I'm talking about what if picking up a paintbrush was just as easy as picking up a microbit in trauma informed school development practices? By 2030, $6 trillion will be spent on behavioral health. That's more than diabetes, respiratory illness, and cancer combined. Do computer science educators consider themselves to be healers? If not, why? And how can we help more to think of themselves as healers?
It's a good question. And a lot of what you're talking about, it sounds like using creative arts therapy for bereavement or trauma processing. My wife is a music therapist at a children's hospital and has done a lot of bereavement stuff like camps for kids who have a loved one who passed away and like helping them process through that. And so when people initially think of like art therapy, dance therapy, music therapy, like things under that creative arts umbrella, they think, oh, you're just like singing songs to be happy, or you're like painting a picture of somebody with a smiling face and then suddenly you're better. Like that's not what it's about. It's about processing your emotions. And well, that's not the one thing, but it's one of the things is processing your emotions and just kind of being able to learn healthy ways of coping through that. So I really like your idea of how can we use computer science to kind of work through trauma. And even if we go steps lower than trauma itself, but even just generalized anxiety or depression, like as somebody who has depression, but chronic depression, but is not depressed, and who has spent a significant portion of my life suicidal, like this is a big thing for me. I want people to know that there are healthy ways of coping through things. And if computer science is one of those things, whether it's like creating a game for yourself or modding something or creating an app just for fun, like as a healthy way of coping with the difficulties in life, I think that's a great idea. How might you recommend we go about either doing that kind of research? Would you recommend CS education researchers pair with creative arts therapists? And then with that, what about for the classroom educator? How might they learn how to do this kind of stuff?
Yes to all of that. When you ask that question, yes, we need computer science educators working with creative arts therapists, working with classroom educators. Fortunately or unfortunately, it doesn't matter. The reality is a lot of administrators are going to measure success of a program like this by how it impacts attendance at the school. And when we have a lot of kids not coming into school for all different variety of reasons, I think it's a real testament of success when a child self-selects to be at school when they could have self-selected otherwise.
Yeah.
And if we can move the needle on school attendance because kids want to be there because of the types of practices with creative computer science, I think that will bring everybody in. To first think of myself as a healer, as no matter what content I'm teaching, to first identify as a healer, I have to first name a problem in my classroom and say, how might my practices in this classroom support community healing? How might these computer science education practices support community healing? And when you have a large population of students in the United States who do not think they will live past the age of 18 because they believe that they will be shot, they believe they will be killed because of the environment that they live in, where's the hope for so-called college and career readiness? Don't talk to me about what I'm going to major in. Don't help me think about my job when I'm 20. Right now, I'm just coping with the reality of the trauma on my street. And I don't want to be at school because school's making it worse. I got to be out here taking care of myself and my family the way I know how. When we can move the needle and make school a safe place for all kids to create their best digital future, we will have buy-in from administrators, we'll have buy-in from classroom teachers, from parents, and most importantly from kids, because they're choosing to be there. I used to have a student who had seizures, and for him, 1 + 9 every day was a new problem that he had to learn. And for his whole year with me, I just began to get the sense that giving him space to feel safe in his environment and notice his environment and learn from his environment would be far more powerful than any flashcard I could give him or pull out from recess or after school meetup that we could do. He liked to play online with 3D modeling games. He would just get lost for ages creating these 3D shapes and then spinning them and rotating them, adjusting the lip of a vase, narrowing the base of a cup, and spinning it. As teachers, we get these instincts. We feel like something is really powerful and important, and so we stay out of the way of it. And yet, I couldn't explain why I felt this was important. All day long, he would spin 3D objects in a free play space. Well, I noticed that his confidence was growing that year. He would raise his hand and he would try to contribute an answer. He'd always wildly guess at it. It was never a right answer. And he'd always smile as he said the wrong answer and then slump his shoulders and put his head down and then peek back up and smile at me anyway because he knew that I cared for him. And
Right.
I think he just wanted to try to be with his peers. But it wasn't until a year later when I had him in a STEAM classroom that we were just starting school and he was looking around the classroom and he was reading the posters on the wall and he raised his hand and he actually contributed something to the conversation that was on topic and was something he had noticed in his environment and was keeping the conversation going. And it might seem like a small moment and maybe something not worthy of noticing, but the way I felt in my teacher heart at that moment is how I felt the days he spent looking at the 3D modeling of the vase spinning on the screen, that something profound was happening. And I think if we had research to, just like you said, support or not support, but reveal, we don't know if it's important. Maybe I'm wrong. This could all be my implicit and unconscious bias, and I'm just confirming, bad ideas in myself. But I think we need research around physical computing, free play exploration, in computer science education that specifically is beneficial to children with neurological disorders whose brains have experienced intense trauma, but who, like my student, were experiencing seizures regularly, unable to remember simple facts. I'd like to help these kids have a voice with digital tools to help create their best digital future.
What questions do you have for myself or to the field at large?
Why do you care about the future of computer science education, Jared?
I've kind of hinted at it in previous episode, and then just kind of talked about it a little bit more in this episode. But being suicidal through high school, the thing that kept me going to school and that kept me going in general was music. That was the one subject area where I felt like I had time to not think the thoughts that I was having that were negative. And so I went into music education because I felt like if I did this thing that helped me so much, then maybe I could help others through that. And what I quickly realized is that not everybody has the same passion for things that I did in the same way. So even though some people were just kind of doing music just for fun, I was doing it to kind of stay alive. And my expectation that others would be as intensely interested in this was false. And so as I continued down the path of education and just gained more experience in the classroom and just with facilitating in general, my idea of how to help others through learning continued to expand. So it expanded into music technology, and then it expanded into the arts and coding and computer science, and it just kept growing and growing. So my passion for computer science grew out of just wanting to help the most people possible. And I still engage with music. I still love music education. And I think you can do a lot of that stuff in computer science. But I think computer science, for me, there's just a lot of really fun and creative ways that people can learn and express themselves through the field. And so that's kind of what I really love about computer science, especially because it's growing so much, and there's a lot of opportunity for kids, whether it be in career-wise or just for leisure or for mental health or whatever.
And that's all you need to hear on this podcast, everybody. That one answer is the whole podcast. Once you internalize it can help people in all those ways, you are good. Jared, that was awesome. Cut out like 99% of what I said and please play that whole thing. That was so good. I want to start all over.
Thank you. Where might people go to connect with yourself in the organizations and the organizations that you work with? Can't speak today.
You can find me on Twitter at Katie Henry Days, online at katiedays.com. And you can find more about the microbit at microbit.org, including the Microbit Do Your Bit Challenge, which is at the bottom of the homepage. Microbit.org, scroll down and just select Enter Do Your Bit.
And that concludes another episode of the CSK8 podcast. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation with Katie. I know I look forward to many more with her and look forward to having her back on as a guest in a future episode where we can kind of further unpack what rhizomatic learning is and potential implications. If you've got suggestions for potential guests, please feel free to contact me on my website. And don't forget to check out the show notes. You can access all of that at jaredoleary.com. Nothing for sale on there, no affiliate links, nothing like that. If you'd be so kind, please consider sharing this podcast and the other resources on my website with others. I would much appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I look forward to recording another episode for next week, which will unpack some scholarship.